Appreciate the pivot that was necessary for due to my family for this Sabbath. Thanks to Randy Lee for that song. That's not one that is in our song list, but it obviously fits the Sabbath in any Sabbath, but particularly today because we're continuing our series on the fourth commandment and continuing in particular just thinking about the Sabbath and how we might be able to remember it and to keep it holy. So we're glad that you could join us this morning for worship. We do hope to be back at Hanover Wayside next week. I'm not sure exactly what will be happening with me and my family. We're feeling well, by the way. Even my daughter, who's sick, is feeling much better. But I'm not preaching next week anyway. Joel Passmore is going to be preaching for us, and so our plan is to have worship at Hanover Wayside next week, and we will also, the picnic that we were supposed to have today will become a Labor Day weekend picnic. So we encourage you next week to come and bring your own meal. We're not going to be a potluck style, but just bring your own meal, and then sort of at a safe distance we can continue part of the purpose of worship, which is to gather with one another, and so we can encourage that kind of fellowship to happen. We have a couple announcements as we get ready for the fall start. So in a minute, Christy Billhauer and Garrett Malone are going to share some things about student ministry and Grace Kids ministry. But let me share a little bit about things that are broader and also particular to adults in the life of our church. And they are these: that on September 13th, so 2 weeks from today, we will start Sunday Communities, and I'll let Garrett and talk about that for students. But for adults, it means we're going to alternate men and women. Part of this is we're not going to be to offer nursery or anything for Grace Kids in the second hour, and Christy will talk about what we are going to do in a second. So we know that not whole families can't stay the same way, so we want to alternate and offer something. Both the men and the women will be studying the book of James, but we'll alternate weeks. So I think the men are the first week on September 13th and the women on September 20th, and then we'll kind of alternate that way through Thanksgiving. This is sort of a Sunday community plan up to the week that leads up to Thanksgiving, as long as it's warm enough for us to be outside and have that. We'll do that at Hanover Wayside, and we'll send something out this week that tells you even specifically where we'll be for as far as the things that are going on during that hour. But we encourage you to stick by. One of the reasons we chose James, both for men and women, is that even though we won't be together, we'll be studying the same book, and that will lead to some conversation. And students will be, I forget which students, but some students will be also looking at the book of James in one of the different student ministry structures in the fall. Another big thing, probably the biggest thing for adults in the life of our church outside of gathered worship, are community groups. And community groups, probably, I think we have now 13 community groups, and probably 85% of adults are in them, which is amazing amount, and just testifies to how important they are for the discipleship of our adults in the life of the church. I'm meeting on Zoom tomorrow night now with community group leaders to do some training with Aaron Holler for leaders for Gentle and Lowly, our One Church, One Study, which I am super excited about. Aaron and I have finished reading that book for the second time and preparing a leader's guide. And it's going to be a great guide for our leaders. If you're not in a community group, I talked to someone yesterday who was desiring to get into one. We have space, we have room. We'd love for you to have them. They meet all different times. I think there's one Saturday, some Sunday, some Wednesday night, some Thursday night. So there's different nights of the week. They'll meet in various ways, of course, during COVID, but we want you to be a part of them. And then two other announcements before we get today. I wanted to give a highlight about our ministry update from our ministry house. Last week, as you remember, Joe Pagic and Dave Reppert got up on behalf of the deacons and shared sort of updates on the ministry house and had a call for action for a lot of needed things that needed to happen at the ministry house. And you guys responded in amazing ways. We have some pictures, if Ross can put them up, from I think 25 different people came yesterday from a dozen different families, and they took down trees that needed to be removed. They also did weeding. We don't have pictures of the trees. You can drive by the house and see, but you can see the new roof by the way there and new windows. You probably can't tell that, but if you knew what they looked like before, you would know they're new. But a lot of kids and adults helped weed. And so the house is shaping up on the outside. They're going to be, took care of some stone removal and weeding along the driveway in the house. We were grateful for the weather. that there was predicted rain, but it been moved away and didn't happen, and allowed to be a full day of work, and the full day was done. And so we're grateful for the deacons and leading in that, and all you guys who showed up there. For those of you who want to help in other ways, there'll be some more future projects coming up, and we will let you know about them and encourage you to be a part of them. And last thing before I turn over to Christy, this is just more kind of the morning. We're gonna hear these announcements. We're gonna call ourselves to worship, sing, and pray, and hear from the scriptures. I did a sermon response guide. I've been doing it. This is the last one I'll do because we'll have other things going on post Labor Day for adults and students. But I want to encourage you today, families or households, if you're a household of 1 or a household of 10, to use the discussion guide, whether you use it right after church, which I would encourage, or whatever time you want to do it. It's very specific on the Sabbath, and it'll help you as a family think through, hey, what's going on our Sundays, and how, if we wanted to make some changes to them, how would we do it? It's very practical guide and a hopeful, encouraging guide as well to applying today's sermon. So, all right, that's a lot for me. Let me turn it over to Christy to talk about Grace Kids.
Good morning, everyone. I am here this morning to tell you how, as a church, we delight in Jesus Christ on Sunday mornings. And the way that we're able to do that is through children's worship, which happens during the worship service. And we've been missing that opportunity for several weeks. Due to COVID, we haven't been able to have in-person children's worship up to this point, and we're really sad about that. And so we have figured out a way to be able to make that work, and we're going to begin classes next week. We are hoping to be able to have good weather and be able to have it every week during the fall, but we'll also follow, the same thing. If we are on Zoom, there just won't be a class, but if we are at Hanover Wayside Park, we will have it. So you can watch for email later today with all the details, but here's some quick things that I do want you to note before next week. One thing is there will not be a nursery, as Clint said, during the service still, or a sermon study class. But starting in 2 weeks, there will be sermon guides for children to use if they are, for the 4th and 5th graders to use if they'd like to use them. And then there also will not be Sunday communities during the second hour. So we're only doing this during the worship service. And the way that we can make it work best is we're going to use areas in the field and at the park to have the kids be socially distanced. We would recommend that they wear masks during the transition time, but they will not have to keep their masks on for the entire class. And the most important thing to note is that you register your children before Sunday morning. This will help us to be able to know how many children to plan for and exactly who will be coming, so we can have the right numbers. And then when you arrive on Sunday morning, you can find me and I will give your child a card that will give them an indication of which class they're going to be going to. It could be different each week just based on our numbers. So those are the quick notes, the most important being that you need to register, and there will be an email today that comes out about that. And you'll also have information in the Wednesday email about it. And I think now I'm turning it over to Garrett.
Almost, you're turning it over to Garrett.
Oh, did I not do anything?
No.
Oh.
I totally forgot. No worries.
Okay.
I wanted to set our conversation about ministry remind you guys about our mission statement that we're drawn together by God's grace to delight in Jesus Christ, depend on him and others, and dangerously live out the gospel, the D's of our ministry. And those things that, as you guys know, or maybe you don't know this, our staff, both for men, women, and children, and students, so all across the spectrum of who we are as a church, we design ministry out of that mission statement and out of what you might recall the discipleship model. So as Christy was talking about delighting, or today we're going to talk about active and regular worship on Sunday mornings. That's a kind of an elder-approved document on discipleship. You guys probably in the recesses of your mind remember the discipleship model. As people join the church, we go through sort of the 6 avenues where we'd love to see everyone in the church. So it's not just an adult thing, it's for students and kids too. And so Christy's goal or strategy of children's worship really is helping students learn out active and regular worship. And we determined along with the elders that having them in for part of the worship and going out for things that are centered on them is the best way for them to actively and regularly worship at that age. And so that model guides us for our staff and the teams that plan and strategize ministry across the full gamut of who we are. And so Christy's sharing is that way, and then Garrett's going to share a little bit of how that comes out in student ministry as well.
Yeah, so like Clint said, we have a lot going on this fall, but I'm not only going to tell you what we have going on, but why we're doing the different things that we're doing and how they fit within the church's overall vision of discipleship as it relates specifically to students. So just as a general thing, our fall ministry officially starts on September 13th, and after looking at the Hanover County school schedule, we're going to be running our fall events all the way through November 22nd, which is the end of that week right before Thanksgiving hits. And kind of the two big events I want to touch on first that we're going to have will happen on Sunday afternoons. If any of you remember from years previous, the middle schoolers have gathered for a Sunday night gathering at the Ozone. Well, because of COVID, things are different. And we're actually going to be doing that gathering at Hanover Wayside Park, the same place we typically do worship on Sunday, because our reservation lasts for the entire day. So the way that will work is on the second and the fourth Sunday of the month from about 6:30 to 8, our middle school students will meet at the park for a time of games. We'll have skits. I'll give a brief talk. We'll have some discussion after that. But it's really just a great way for kids to be drawn together for thinking about that discipleship model. I think there's even a graphic that Ross might be able to throw up there that just has like a visual of the way that we disciple people in our church. Here we go. So it's a nice little baseball diamond. I don't know if anybody watches baseball anymore. I really don't, but just kind of the idea of like first, second, third, home base, and then you can keep looping around that. So the idea of drawing together that these middle school and these high school gatherings, they'll happen on Sunday night, and I'll get to high school in a second, are actually, yes, they're for the students in our youth group, but they're also for the friends of the students. These are a great way for our students who are actively involved in pursuing Christ to be able to pursue other students and bring them to a place that's approachable. They'll hear the gospel, and they'll be in community with other people who are focused on Christ. And new this year, we're actually going to do a high school gathering on Sunday nights. So on alternating Sundays with middle school, so the first and the third Sunday of the month, the high schoolers will meet at Hanover Wayside Park. And I know I'm throwing a lot of dates and a lot of alternating things at you. We'll be sending out a fall calendar next week that has this all graphically explained. It'll be in weekly emails and our GCPC emails. So don't feel the need to remember everything I'm saying specifically. Just get that overall framework of what we're doing. But the high school gathering will be a new opportunity, and it'll be functionally different from middle schoolers because high schoolers are on a different level of how they engage, but the purpose is the same, that it's a way for high schoolers to invite their friends who might be asking questions or not even concerned at all with Jesus or Christianity, and a way for them to engage and hear the gospel. And the setup of the high school gathering will look a lot like the setup of our summer Bible studies, where it'll be a more or less informal Bible study where we'll have students be able to bring their own dinner, eat, talk, hang out for a little bit, and then flip through a passage of the Bible for a little bit. And we'll actually be going through James, so that'll match up really well with the men and women study and hopefully foster some communication and some conversations between students and their parents that are going through that. And so again, that'll be at Hanover Wayside Park, and that's more of our drawing together. And also on that same note is that each month we're looking to have a different fun event outside of our gatherings and other regularly scheduled Bible studies for a middle school and a high school. And some months they'll be combined, some months they'll be separate, but again, it'll be a really good way to foster community and a sense of belonging within our youth group, and also a way to invite students in a way that's pretty approachable and doesn't feel too aggressive, I guess, if you're just having someone come to a church event for the first time. And also thinking about drawing kids together, we want to make them dependent on each other and gospel-centered friendships, and also dependent on God in their everyday life, in a way that we accomplish both drawing kids together and having them start to depend on those good things are through our morning groups. And that's one of our biggest ministries with the GCPC student ministry. And I'm really happy to announce that after just exploring a bunch of different avenues, looking at COVID, looking at the different public health guidelines, that we are able to offer morning groups in the morning in an indoor location at the Ash Creek Neighborhood Clubhouse. And those will start September 28th and run through November 22nd. So that'll be for an 8-week time period. And there's tons of details on all the different COVID mitigation strategies, all the like safety, social distancing, hygiene, all that stuff is in the email we send out to student ministries and parents. And I can give that to you as well if you're curious about that. But functionally, they'll look very similar to how they have in years past. But instead of going to a restaurant, we'll bring the restaurant to the students at the Ash Creek Clubhouse. We'll cater in Chick-fil-A and all that fun stuff. But those times are for students to meet in smaller groups and study through the Bible together or different curriculum together. And they'll be in groups of about 5 or 6 students. And hopefully they'll be in the same groups as they progress throughout middle and high school. And they'll be with a leader or two that will know them and get to mentor them and just pour truth into their life and really care about them. And on that note, we are also looking for another male leader who would be maybe interested in leading indoors in the mornings before work from about 7:15 or 8:15 in the morning for middle school guys. So if you or anyone you know has a heart for students and has been looking for a way to serve, and if you're comfortable with meeting with students with masks, socially distanced inside in the morning, if you please reach out to me or one of the other student ministry people, we will gladly talk with you about that, because we are in need of one more leader to make this happen, ideally this year. And like Clint was saying, we do have Sunday communities starting back up on September 13th. And we will have high school and middle school Sunday communities, but they'll be alternating each week, like the men's and women's, to facilitate families, getting home and all that kind of stuff better, because we won't be able to offer nursery during the hour. And both the middle and high school will be going through the same curriculum, which is the book of Hebrews. And our goal of this Sunday community in the fall, we're going to go through the entire book of Hebrews. And we really want to look at that third base of delighting in Christ. And I think one of the most important things that any Christian can do is engage with the Word of God on a regular basis. So our idea is to have a setup where middle school and high school are on the same pacing, but they're going to meet every other week with their group leaders, with their Sunday community teachers who are going to talk about the book of Hebrews. But between that, each week they're going to have 2 or 3 5-minute or so devotionals where they'll be reading through the book of Hebrews on their own, asking themselves a couple questions and maybe have a couple points and explaining a couple of the harder parts of the Bible to them. And our goal with this is to get them in a healthy rhythm and pattern of engaging with the Bible on their own and growing to delight in Christ and grow in knowledge. We'll be addressing a couple of deeper issues and deeper things in the Bible in this study as well, because it is primarily geared to students who are already believers. I'm really excited for that opportunity. Moving from delighting in Christ to living dangerously. When we think about living dangerously for Christ, that is moving ourselves out of our comfort zone. And one of the easiest ways we can do that is through serving others in our community. And ideally, we're looking to have 1 or 2 service opportunities each month as allowed for our different students to engage in. And these will be announced through the email and all of that. Some of them might be on weeknights, some might be on weekends. We're trying to have a variety of times so different people can engage, but we're going to find things maybe like the Hanover Firewood Ministry, working on the ministry house or other kind of outdoor projects that are safe for our students to engage in during COVID, but also a meaningful way to impact those around us and kind of get them out of their comfort zone. And again, a great way for students to get out of their comfort zone and live dangerously is through personal friendship evangelism. And that's just a fancy word for living like a Christian around other people who aren't Christians and inviting them to things like fun events and gatherings and all that, and just sharing Christ and the gospel with them that way. So we got a lot going on this fall, and you can kind of see it all plugs in and corresponds to the church's overall way of discipleship. So I'm excited for that. And again, if you're interested in being a morning group leader for middle school guys, please reach out. And I'll hand it back to Clint now.
Great, thanks, Garrett. And just to let you know, there's a lot that Garrett shared, a lot that Christy shared. Just to draw back to that, our discipleship model. So one of the 6 avenues we say we want to see men, women, and kids grow is through individual or household Bible reading, reflection, and prayer. And so you can see some of the aspects involve Sunday communities about this desire for kids to read on their own, with some help, with some encouragement from you, some encouragement from student ministry leaders that will help them. And then one of our other avenues is through sharing the hope of the gospel with those outside the church. And so that is, kids are already doing that. Half of our kids that are involved in morning groups don't go to our church, and probably a good half to 60% of those kids don't go to church at all. And so our kids are doing that. In fact, some ways they're doing it better than us as adults. And so we want to provide those places where it makes it easy for kids to really care about their friends and invite them into relationship to consider Jesus. All right, there's a lot of announcements. We put all those things at the front. By the way, one thing, we in addition to the in-person morning group, there will be outdoor morning group options for those who feel more comfortable with that. There's some leaders who want to do that, and there's a place, and if there are kids who want to do morning group but don't want to do it inside, their parents don't want to do it inside, we'll have an option that way. You can check the link out as you sign up and register that Garrett's already sent out, and we'll send out again. But as we wanted to put all these announcements at the front part for you to hear them, because there's a lot going on in the fall and we want you to get engaged with it. But we also then want to sort of transition and actually formally kind of call ourselves to worship and begin the worship service and have a more contemplative time to look at the scriptures, which we will right now, Psalm 149, and then sing and hear from the word. And so we're going to begin our worship service officially right now with this call to worship. So this is Psalm 149. And pre-service, as we were going through things, I kind of thought it was funny a little bit, maybe you will. The last line in the call to worship says, let them sing for joy on their beds. And this is probably one of the few times in life where you can literally make that happen. I'm not sure where you guys are and what setting you are, but some of you might literally be on your beds singing for joy. So you can literally apply this call to worship today in ways in which you can't when we're at Hanover Wayside. So hear this call, and then Randy will lead us in some singing. Praise the Lord. Sing to the Lord a new song, his praise in the assembly of the godly. Let Israel be glad in his maker. Let the children of Zion rejoice in their king. Let them praise his name with dancing, making melody to him with tambourine and lyre. For the Lord takes pleasure in his people. He adorns the humble with salvation. Let the godly exalt in glory. Let them sing for joy on their beds.
Good morning, friends. We're going to spend some time just singing a couple songs that point us to Jesus and point us to, the rest that we have in him. Clint's going to be talking, as you know, this morning about the Sabbath and really what a gift it is to us to kind of get us to stop from our thrashing in life and our, the mix of our fears and our worries and striving. And this first song, Living Waters, asks a couple questions in the beginning. Are you thirsty? Are you empty? And sure, those are questions pointed at unbelievers, drawing them to the source of real life. But it's also, questions for us. And we would all answer that with a resounding yes, I think, if we were still enough and quiet enough to consider, where our hearts are, if not acutely this morning from time to time. So let's just kind of settle in. We'll sing these songs and ask that God, point our hearts to him and to his rest this morning. Are you thirsty? Are you empty? Come and drink these living waters. Tired and broken, peace unspoken, rest beside these living waters. Christ is calling, find refreshing at the cross of living waters. Lay your life down, all the old gone, rise up in these living waters. There's a river that flows with mercy and love, bringing joy to the city of our God. There our hope is secure, do not fear anymore. Praise the Lord of living waters. Spirit moving, mercy and drink these living waters. Love, forgiveness, vast and boundless. Christ, He is our living waters. There's a river that flows with mercy and love, bringing joy to the city of our God. There our hope is secure, do not fear anymore. Praise the Lord of living waters. There's a river that flows with mercy and love, bringing joy to the city of our God. There our hope is secure, do not fear anymore. Praise the Lord of living waters. Thou poor afflicted, tempted soul, with fears and doubts and tempests tossed. What if the billows rise and roll and dash thy ship? It is not lost. The winds and waves and fiends may roar, but Christ will bring thee safe on shore. The winds and waves and fiends may roar, but Christ will bring thee safe on shore. What ails those eyes bedewed with tears, those laboring sighs that heave thy breast? Those oft repeated broken prayers, dost thou not long for Jesus' rest? And can the Lord pass heedless by and see a mourning sinner die? And can the Lord pass heedless by and see a sad and mourning sinner die? Thou poor afflicted, tempted soul, with fears and doubts and tempests tossed. What if the billows rise and roll and dash thy ship? It is not lost. The winds and waves and fiends may roar, but Christ will bring thee safe on shore. The winds and waves and fiends may roar, but Christ will bring thee safe on shore.
Thanks, Randy, for leading us this morning, and for that hymn in particular, in the midst of potential the despair, both in your life to look at or in the greater world. It's good to know that Christ is leading us. and will lead us. We're going to continue our series in the Ten Commandments. I preached last week on the Sabbath, and I'm preaching again this week. And encourage you, don't normally do this, but if you didn't hear the sermon last week, it would be helpful actually. It's a kind of reverse order, but to go onto our YouTube channel and listen to last week's sermon in order to better apply this week's sermon. But we're going let's dive into the Sabbath. I want to just think about this reality. Let me pray for us as we begin. Father, we need to hear from you. We just heard from you. We heard about life in our church. We heard the truths of the gospel through the two songs that Randy led us to sing. Help us now to hear from me, use even me by the power of your Holy Spirit, and use your word and use this time for us to contemplate this day. And particularly this day, that it's the Sabbath and what it means for us as a gift from you. Amen. Run, walk, nap, read the Bible, watch a sporting event, if there are any sporting events, get a jump start on Monday work, serve in the community, go to a movie, probably a drive-in movie. What are you going to do this afternoon after worship? And does the fourth commandment inform it? Yes, no, why not, how so? Last week, as I said, we started on understanding the importance of the Sabbath. Today, we're going to try to talk about what does it actually mean to apply if we understand the importance. We said, what is the Sabbath? Is it for us? It's a remembering who God is and what he has done. Remember the Sabbath day. It's a remembering because we so easily forget. We talked about it being a remembering to rest, and we'll come back to rest later on this morning. Resting physically for sure, but more resting in the joy of who God is. It's a pointer to greater rest. Hebrews 4 is a passage we looked at last week. There remains a Sabbath rest. The Sabbath is a builder of faith. To Sabbath, thinking about the verb use of it, necessitates faith in God, we talked about, that you and your family would be all right if you actually rest. That you can trust his governance of the world. It's actually a sign of being God's people. Like circumcision or baptism, that someone who Sabbaths, someone who rests on Sunday, and it really does stand out in our culture in particular now. Someone might say, hey, that person knows God and their life is shaped by God. And even if a person doesn't know it, it is a sign to the world that you are a person of God and that you are marked by his promises and his blessings. And the prologue to our commandment today shows the relationship, as do the commandments themselves. So let's reread our passage this morning and then jump in. And God spoke all these words, saying, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the Sabbath. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. We're going to ask about how to apply this commandment in 5 or 6 ways. And this way is first, is it on Saturday or is it on Sunday? Or is it another day of the week? We talked about this a little bit last week, but I want to talk about it more today because I'm trying to get actually practical in when does this happen and what might happen on the day. The first is the seventh day in context of Exodus 20 was actually Saturday. That's the Jewish Sabbath, still is. So on what basis do we celebrate it on Sunday, or what basis do I advocate the celebration on Sunday? In fact, there are some smaller Christian denominations, really small, the biggest one of which is probably Seventh-day Adventists, that they assert that the Sabbath should be done on Saturday as it was in the Old Testament, as it is among Judaism. And in favor of the Seventh-day Adventists, I'm not going to go too much propagating their belief, but in fairness to that belief, probably the cleanest reason to think about it still being on the Sabbath on Saturday is this: neither Jesus nor his apostles ever came out and said the Sabbath day has changed from Saturday to Sunday. That's probably the strongest argument. There's nothing in the Bible we can find that way. And historically, the evidence of the early church is actually a little bit mixed. It appears that some believers continued to observe Saturday, and others began to view Sunday as the Sabbath, calling it the Lord's Day. Sometimes motivated to distinguish themselves from the Jews, and many Jewish Christians seem to observe both days. Paul, for instance, you'll find him on the synagogue on Saturday, and then he talks about the Lord's Day, right? In 1 Corinthians, he says, on the first day of every week, each one of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. And so the first day is Sunday, the first day of the week back then. We kind of think of the first day of the week Monday, but the first day of the week historically is Sunday. And Paul says this in Acts 20 verse 7. On the first day of the week, when we are gathered together to break bread, Paul talked to them, intending to depart on the next day. And so there seems to be the gathering of the church on the first day of the week. But that's about all we have. As time moves on, Sunday becomes the more significant day for the early church, but it's a process. There's not a clear command, right? And that's troubling to some people. I think the messiness is awesome because it shows the development of an understanding of the importance of the Sabbath for Christians, and particularly the development on Sunday. It's kind of like the Bible, the canon. If you're unfamiliar with that term, the canon is basically just the group of books that make up the Bible, the 66. It's not like, particularly the New Testament canon, it's not like we knew that in AD 34, right? It had to develop. Hey, what are these oral traditions that are going on as they get to be written down? How do we know the words about Jesus that are true? And how do we know the canon? The canon wasn't fully developed for a couple hundred years in the history of the church. It's not like that God said, here are the 27 books and dropped them from heaven and gave them to us. That's not the process. It's messier than that. And some of us don't like that mess. We'd like to have more clear cut. There's some debate. Sometimes there's scandal. You can think of Dan Brown and the Da Vinci Code as the scandal that's unnecessary. There's not scandal. It's just that it became over a process known what are the books of the Bible. Similarly, it became as a process known that Sunday is the Sabbath for the Christians. It wasn't clean cut. It took centuries. Here's some mid-century Christians, Ignatius and Justin Martyr. You might know their names. If you know church history, you would know their names more, but this is them talking about this process. So this is an old quote, right? This is about 100 years after Jesus has been ascended to the right hand of the Father. Ignatius says, Christians no longer observe the Sabbath, but direct their lives towards the Lord's Day, on which our life is refreshed by him and by his death. Justin Martyr, Sunday becomes the term for describing the gathering of believers in the cities and the countryside. And so you can see this in process, right? It wasn't until Constantine in the 4th century that Sunday was proclaimed the Sabbath day for Christians. Why? Because then the Christians are the majority, or Christians are in charge of there's a mixing of church and state, right? It wouldn't be much good in the 1st century if you're a slave to say, hey, I'm a slave, but Sunday's my Sabbath. Can I have that day off? It wasn't going to happen anyway, right? They didn't get rest at all, Saturday, Sunday, anytime, right? But it's a growing recognition of the importance of Sunday, the Lord's Day. It flowed from the Spirit as the church came to see the power of the Lord's Day. So yes, the switch from Saturday to Sunday, if the Christian Sabbath remains, which I think it does remain, and we talked about it last week, it doesn't come from the Lord of the Sabbath himself. There's no words of Jesus that tell you that, but surely by his life, he tells you that. On what day does he emerge from the tomb? He emerges on a Sunday, the Lord's Day. It appears to the gathered disciples in John 20, verse 1. The first Sabbath gathering of the church is Resurrection Day, number 1, the empty tomb. And so you start with the day that makes sense for the feast of the Sabbath for the Christian. On Saturday, Jesus is in the tomb dead. It'd be a little bit odd for that to be our Sabbath day. Sorry, Seventh-day Adventists. You can't press it as a command, but a strong call to recognize what has been recognized by Christians in the early parts of the church, and then from that day forward. Gerhardus Voss, a great name, says it this way, speaking about this. We do not sufficiently realize the profound sense the early church had of the epoch-making significance of the appearance and especially the resurrection of the Messiah. The latter was to them nothing less than bringing it in of anew the second creation. And they felt that this ought to find expression in the placing of the Sabbath with reference to the other days of the week. If there is in the New Testament no formal enactment regarding this change, the cause lies in the superfluousness of it. It's a strong claim. It's basically saying you don't even have to wonder. Of course it would be this day. Now, some people will say, even among Christians, that any day can be our Sabbath, that there isn't a clear declaration of it. And sometimes people say, I take my Sabbath on the Tuesday, and I'm not going to quell with anyone who actually takes a Sabbath, because as we'll see, I don't think that's a practice very rich in the modern church. And so if that needs to be your day, then that's fine. But for the Christian, we probably need to tie it more to Christ's community. And part of it we'll see is the gathering of the community. We see that in Acts 20, they are gathered when Paul comes to them. If there's a reshaping of the Sabbath. Would it be wrong for a church to decide Friday as a Sabbath for their community? It wouldn't be wrong. And in fact, I have a friend who leads an international church in Dubai. And in that culture, a Muslim culture, Friday is the day off. And so Friday is the day that it's easier for the church to gather. And so that's their Sabbath. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But again, it's centered around the gathered church community because for them, the day they can gather is Friday more easily. But I'm also not advocating for a flattening of days. There's very much a thoughtful communal reality both to church and culture. In the main, for most Christians around the world, Sunday as Sabbath has the most weight to it. While there's no clear command, there's almost a divine appointment to see it that way. Now you might be thinking, why are you spending so much time talking about which day it is? I kind of assumed it was Sunday already, Clint. Well, I don't think it's assumed as much. And also, I just wanted to think about, this is the day for us to think about remembering, right? And so the second way in which we apply this is we do remember. It's not merely a cognitive experience. Oh, I remember it's Sunday, right? But as we talked about last week, it's more, remembrance means don't forsake it. Keep it as holy. And that's a challenge to us as Christians. It's kind of like this. When you remember your anniversary, if you're married, or you remember your kid's birthday, or a special meaningful day, you don't just think about it intellectually. You don't just say, oh yeah, it's my anniversary. You better be doing something, right, on your anniversary, or your kid's birthday. Hey, it's my kid's birthday. It's their 8th birthday. You remember with action, right? You don't forsake your kid's birthday. You don't forsake your anniversary, or you perhaps get in trouble. You don't forsake meaningful days. You don't just remember cognitively, you remember with action. Similarly, 1 in 7 days, we're supposed to remember with action. God remembers with action. We hear in Exodus 2 that God remembered Israel in Egypt, that they were slaves. And it's not like, oh yeah, I remember, oh, those guys are having a hard time in Egypt. He remembers and then he acts. Likewise, we're meant to as well. If the 4th commandment is a mere cognitive experience, you can be sure you are violating it. It should inform your day. It's informing your day right now. I want to encourage you right now. It's informing your day. You're here, right? We're here, gathered the way we can gather today for worship. It's informing action in your life. So the third thing that we do with the Sabbath is this. We remember to worship. We remember to worship together. When I wrote this sermon, man, on Wednesday and Thursday, I was feeling like this is awesome. I had an email queued up to say, if you can, come gather with us, because we remember the Sabbath as we gather together. And then God just sort of allowed that not to happen, right? And it kind of comes back to the doubt of family while we're not gathered today on this beautiful day in the park. I encourage you to gather with other Christians the rest of the day if you can. I can't be there this particular one. But Sunday morning worship is Sabbath remembrance together. Together. In our discipleship model that I referred to earlier and that our church staff does ministry around, the first one is this: through regular and active worship on Sunday mornings. That's how you remember the Sabbath, principally. That's the principal application. It actually shapes and could shape your whole morning, right? Whether you're helping to lead in worship, whether you're helping to watch kids in our normal thing, or teaching kids, or being there, leading and playing an instrument, or participating in the worship. And friends, let me tell you, this is less and less normal. And I'm not just talking about COVID times. It is true in COVID times, it's less and less normal. But let's just see how we come out of COVID, if it'll be more normal. And even if not, statistically, people gather less and less for worship. They remember the Sabbath less, and probably the easiest or the most important way in which to do it. Probably not actually easy. It's more and more discernible in our culture that people are remembering the Sabbath less by gathering for worship. And some people even question the necessity of it. Among Christians, not just the wider culture, America has a me and Jesus fascination with their spirituality. So I don't need the church to worship. I can go down on the lake and worship. I can go ride my bike and worship. I can stay in my house and worship. You can. You can. But part and parcel for Moses, part and parcel for the Christian church to remember the Sabbath is this gathering of the church. It's normal. Are there other ways to pursue worship alone? Yes, you can do that bike ride and pursue worship alone. You should pursue worship within your household every day, reading the Bible and praying with those you live with, talking about spiritual things. But central to our identity is a communal identity. It's so clear in the Bible that to remember the Sabbath means the gathering of the church that I don't even know where to begin with someone who has a different mindset. I honestly don't. I literally could open the Bible up and just show you over and over again. I'm not saying you have that mindset, but it's so wrapped into the understanding of what it means to be the people of God. You know, for instance, why does Paul evangelize and then spend so much of the rest of his life after he becomes a Christian setting up churches, training elders, training deacons, preaching the word, spending 3 years in Ephesus to gather and see local churches? He church plants essentially for his career, for us not to value the gathered church, for it not to be so central to who we are as the people of God, for us as Americans to say, you know, I can do with or without the church. Well, his head would explode, I think. How is that even possible? How could you possibly read the New Testament and think any differently, Paul would say. And so Sabbath worship, an observance of the Sabbath, must start with the communal church, right? Now you can see why I wish we were at Hanover Wayside together this morning. It's not the only way to worship. That's not the only way to grow as a Christian. Garrett and Christy just laid out tons of ways, and I did too, about adult discipleship that we are looking for and desiring for us as Christians to gather and worship in other ways. Community groups are so central to us. Student ministry is central. Grace Kids ministry is central for our kids. But the biblical writers, get my point here, cannot fathom faithful Sabbath observance that does not involve the gathering of the church. The church, the term ecclesia, which is the Greek word for church, means a gathered people. It literally means that. That's what I mean when I can't even understand the mindset that doesn't centralize the gathered church for worship, right? The word literally means a gathered people. That's why there's irony today that we're not actually gathered in the way in which we would like to be. This is a gathering, though, friend. It's a gathering we can do today, and so we ought to encourage it. We also ought to even more so when we can gather when we can. So I know for some of you on Sundays, I just want to say Hanover Wayside is a fantastic place in which God has given us to gather for worship for the next couple months. We'll figure out November and December down the road, but in September and October, if there are COVID reasons why you can't gather, we respect that. And we acknowledge that. If some of those reasons, as I talked to some different people this week, are it's just easier to Zoom, or I kind of just like it, I just want to encourage you, that's not a good reason. If you can, you ought to come. If it's loud, it will be loud. I went to City Church last week, and man, Eric Bonkowski, I look back because that dude sings so loudly, and he had a mask on singing, and his didn't let the mask keep him from singing, right? And there were so many kids behind me in the back of that sanctuary, which is a big sanctuary, and they were so loud, and I just started laughing at one point because they were so loud. And I said, this is awesome. This is how the church has worshiped for century upon century, right? Friend, our international brothers and sisters risk their very lives at points to gather. Sometimes we risk inconvenience, getting up earlier. I don't want to have to go there, right? Friend, Sabbath, this is what God has to liberate you, is his church, right? And so we love Hanover Wayside as a place. And so I encourage you to that. Today, we gather as we can, and we gather regularly. Hopefully that's a regular part of who you are. And hopefully it's also the second part that the elders put in there was it's active. When you come this morning where you are, be active in worship. Sometimes we just show up to places in life and we're not active. And people are like, man, you kind of seem out of it today. Sometimes we're out of it. Sometimes we're going through hard things. But the desire would be regular and active worship. Sing like you mean it. Listen to a sermon as if God is going to meet you, because he will. I'm not the greatest preacher there is. You can find, I'm going to tell you a little secret, you can find better preachers online than me, right? But I'm the best preacher for you because you're part of Grace Community. And I'm a good enough preacher because I know Jesus, right? And we have good enough music leaders. We have good enough people to lead ministries. And they're the perfect people for you if you call Grace Community your home, because that's the church God's called you to. There's actually no one better. There's no one, Tim Keller is not a better preacher for you than me because I'm your preacher, right? And he would tell you the same thing. So active and regular is what we're supposed to do. That sustained over a lifetime, friends, builds you up. It builds you up more than anything. It's subtle, it's slow. It takes 18 years. It takes you enduring a 2-year-old crying and going, why did I even come here this morning, right? I've seen some of you in the park wondering by that thing, why did I come here this morning? I could have Zoomed to give my kids something else, because this is what God says to do. This is what will build you up as the people of God. And let me encourage you, friends, as someone who is at the end of Kids in the Home, study after study in our era will tell you this, that the clearest indication of the well-being of someone's spiritual well-being for a lifetime, we worry about that for our kids as they grow, and we worry about that, let's have youth night and youth church service and youth this way, and let's give them what they want, right? The clearest study is this, the clearest indicator of a person's well-being and their sustainability in the church of God for a life is their sustainability within the church of God during their lifetime growing up. In other words, bringing them to the gathered body of Christ. I see that in my kids. I see that in our kids who are in college and outside of college, and they're doing well, is tied to the fact that they were with us for 18 years, right? And it's the fitting, faithful response to this call on the Sabbath. There are a lot more hours in the day than we would gather on Sunday morning, though, right? And so I want to talk about remembering the Sabbath in other ways, but I can't overemphasize. And you're like, man, you are emphasizing it. I get it. Remember the Sabbath this way, right? The gathering of the church. We remember next not to work, right? That's the most literal version or interpretation of what Moses is saying here, right? We remember to not work. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter, your male servant, your female servant. Hey, let me just make sure you understand this. Not even your livestock or even the sojourner, the foreigner, the one who's within your gates, he isn't to work either. I think Moses is making it pretty clear what he is intending. But what is work? In the ancient Near Eastern context, this commandment does not answer, but gives some clues when it talks about maidservant, manservant, even your livestock. It seems pretty holistic to allow your family and those in your care to rest. We know what one is work at one level, but a full definition is hard to define. And in fact, in Jesus' day, and we encounter this a lot when we read the New Testament, we see the Pharisees developing so many guidelines that Jesus and his apostles are bumping up against about what it means to work and what it means to remember the Sabbath. On the one hand, it's commendable. You don't always hear the Pharisees commended. I want to commend the Pharisees at one level. They were trying to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. That's why they came up with these guidelines. They went awry. But their desire was to avoid work and celebrate it. It became greater than the command, unfortunately, for them, and they became legalistic. Don't do any work is what Exodus 20 says. And as Mark Twain reminds us, he's not a theologian. I guess I'm not even sure he was a Christian, but he says, it ain't those parts of the Bible I don't understand that bother me. It's the parts I do understand. And we don't like that part of the Bible, right? It doesn't mean that everything's clear in regard to work, but it does mean that most of it is clear. Often we ask questions about the Sabbath observance, not to obey, but to ease our consciences about what it means to be faithful to God's commands. Do not work. Don't work your job. But what else is work? Jesus runs into conflict, right? In regards to less common notions of work. In Luke 14, he talks about pulling an ox out of a pit. And he says, is that work or is that necessity? And his implication is, you do that. You would pull your ox out of the ditch, right? And so that's what I'm doing when I'm healing somebody. I'm doing something that's necessary. It's not work. And in fact, Jesus and his disciples pick grain from the fields. And the Pharisees are upset about it. You can read about it in Matthew 12. And he's saying, this is necessary. This isn't work. This is us eating, right? And telling a paralyzed man to pick up his mat after being healed. Jesus drew the ire of the Pharisees because he did it on the Sabbath. And he said, you're missing the point of the Sabbath when you critique me this way. Their attitude robbed the Sabbath of its characteristic gratitude for liberation. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, Jesus says in that instance. The Westminster Confession 117 says it this way: do not work except so much as it is to be taken up in works of necessity and mercy, like pulling an ox out of a pit, healing someone in need. Why wait another day for that? Why wait another day to do a work of mercy, is Jesus' point. And so there's this category of mercy and necessity that theologians have thought about, and it comes into play into work. Why am I bringing it up? Because, friends, we want our law enforcement officers, we want our firefighters, we want our medical folks, we want our pastors working on Sunday, right? That's a work of necessity, the Westminster Confession would say. But it becomes a little gray in that point, more difficult when you push the boundaries from these categories, and it moves from necessity and mercy to economic productivity and profit. That's less ground of remembering the Sabbath. We need grace here as we apply this to work. But as believers, we should apply God's work here for our own benefit, to remember the day, to set it off as holy, even down to the occupations we pursue with this in mind. Do I need to work? Is it a work of necessity for me to work? Let me encourage you, if you're a student, as school gets ready to start back up, whether you're a homeschool student or a private school student or an online or a face-to-face public school student, let me encourage you, students, here's a very direct application for you on Sabbath. Let me encourage you to hold off your work on Sunday, to not do it, to do it Friday, to do it Saturday, but to make Sunday different. Honestly, the days that I was more faithful to the Sabbath than I probably ever was, and I experienced the rest of the Sabbath were the 3 years that I was in grad school. Jen and I worked 6 days hard, both in some work in ministry and also work being students, being grad students in seminary. But we decided we're not going to study on Sunday. This is our work. That was our work. That was the application of the Lord's commandment to us. And that day, for those 3 years, was so different because it wasn't what we normally did. We rested from our work, our studies, and we remembered the Sabbath. How do you apply this? We remember to rest and stop. I'll give you some direct things at the end of the sermon, but let me give you some as we move towards it. The fourth commandment is set positively. While there's the negative to not work, there's the positive to remember and to rest. 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day is a day of solemn rest, a holy convocation. This is Leviticus 2:23. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwelling places. That ordinary physical rest whereby we catch our breath and make room for praising God is itself already a spiritual enjoyment. The spiritual essence does not lie somewhere beyond our physical rest, but within the physical rest. Resting from your daily work and generously allowing your employees to rest as you do is already putting to death your own will and allowing God to work in you. It's beginning the work of the Sabbath. It's beginning the work of Hebrews 4, what is to come. It's beginning it in the present. It's an invasion of it. It's so countercultural now. It wouldn't have been countercultural 150 years ago. It would have been the norm if you lived in America, but now it's countercultural. It's a sign to the world, but it's a participation that's for your good. That principle goes beyond work as well. Rest is not mere cessation from labor, far less recovery from fatigue, although that's part of it. It means peace, a positive state, not a negative, not the absence, but something positive. What's what Augustine, the great 4th century thinker, said? You have made us to rest for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you, right? That is a true statement. We are restless until we rest in Jesus. And so the Sabbath is a participation of it, a 1 in 7 cessation, but a positive participation in the rest of who God is. And worship is part of that. When we read gentle and lowly together, we're going to rest in his forgiveness, rest in his work. It's going to push you to say, do you really rest in his forgiveness? Do you really believe it? Right? It's also, Sabbath is a stop. It actually comes from the Hebrew word sabbat, which literally means stop. That's what it means. Stop what? Stop. Stop working. Stop wanting. Stop worrying. Stop. Stop is another way of saying enough. It's hard to stop. COVID helped us for a while. COVID at the Dowdas is a hard stop for the Dowdas, right? Sabbath means stop. Sabbath means stop. Stop what? Stop what for? Just stop. Friends, in our culture, it takes a lot just to stop. I have empathy because this 4th commandment observance is so difficult for us and who we are as the people of God, 21st century America. But it's so vital that it's the only, think about it this way, in the 10 commandments, we haven't gotten that far, we're at commandment number 4, as you know, but it's the only spiritual discipline, when you think about spiritual disciplines, that is listed among the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments are like the granddaddy of the law, right? And it's the only one, it's the only spiritual discipline that's listed among the 10. There's no Bible study listed in the 10 commandments, not that of course is not important. There's no prayer listed in the 10 commandments. There's no fasting listed in the 10 commandments. The only spiritual discipline listed in the 10 commandments is the Sabbath. That's how central it is. Halt from the frenziness and pace of your life. While specifics do not abound in Exodus 20 or Deuteronomy 5, the day calls for thoughtful specifics and the application to rest and stop. It is not, if not, it just becomes another day like any other. We need to engage with the day. The principle is treating it as holy. God made it holy. God rested himself. And there's the rub. And there's the possible judgment, the possible guilt, the possible idleness, but also the possible liberation, the possible rest, the possible grace and honoring of God. Let me read from you the Westminster Larger Catechism, questions 119 and 117. We read from the Heidelberg Catechism last week as they talk about these days, and then we're going to continue to apply even more directly in the last few minutes of our sermon. Rest. But even from such worldly employments and recreations as are on other days lawful, all profaning the day by idleness. This is how to observe or not observe, to keep from forsaking it, and doing that which is sinful itself, and by all needless works, words, and thoughts about our worldly employments and recreations, and making it our delight to spend the whole time, except so much of it as it to be taken up in works of necessity and mercy in the private and public exercises of God's worship. Some have said, keep that up for a minute, Ross. Some have said that the writers of the confession have spelled out in too great detail how we remember the day, that they go too detailed into it. In fact, particularly as it involves recreation. And in fact, some elders, as they become ordained in our denomination, take an exception to these two confessions. And I have done it myself in regard to 119, that perhaps the writers of the Westminster Confession are telling you too much, maybe becoming a little bit pharisaical in what is and what isn't allowed in a Sabbath of remembrance. And so I want to oppose and to advocate here for what the writers are saying. Can I do both? Yeah, I can do both. I'm gonna oppose what they say here and advocate for what they say. So keep it up there just for a second, Ross. So implications of 119 would be questions that you might have. Can I observe the sacrament? You know, is it all right if I work out or take a run or watch other recreation on the Sabbath? Can I take a walk? But if I walk with my wife, do I have to only talk about spiritual things, or can we talk about something else? Can I nap? But if I nap, do I have to pray and that I dream about Jesus during my nap before I nap? I'm being a little provocative, being a little edgy, but the implication of 119 seems like it's a little curtailing and a little telling you too much what it might be to observe the Sabbath. Can I do any work around the house can I do any work around the house without exception? What if gardening is a place of rest for me? A place where I rejuvenate and I worship God? Can I do that on Sunday afternoon? Can I help a neighbor who needs help with a project? It seems like Catechism 119 and 117 are over-defining of what remembrance looks like a little bit, maybe going beyond the Bible too much. Okay, we can put that down now, Ross. We want to avoid the mistakes of the Pharisees in over-defining Sabbath observance, and perhaps what the Westminster Confession has done in over-defining it. But let's be real. Let's be real for a second. Very few of us are in danger of over-defining Sabbath observance. Most of us don't think about the commandment enough to ever be charged with legalistically observing the Sabbath. You have to know who you are. I'm not going to be charged with legalistically observing the Sabbath very often, right? Oh, to be charged with that. That would actually be health for us as a church. Not that we want to end up in legalism, friends, but we have to know where we are with this commandment. The day is not considered different by the wider culture. It's the water we swim in, and we'll have to be thoughtful and proactive if we want to remember the Sabbath and have it be different. And so let me advocate for what the Westminster Confession is saying. They take the command seriously, thoughtful engagement, Are we even asking these questions in regard to the Sabbath? We need to remember and carve out the Sabbath rest. What's going to lead to God's glory and a deeper worshiping of us, of God by us? Dan Allender says it this way about the Sabbath. The Sabbath is an invitation to enter delight. The Sabbath, when experienced as God intended, is the best day of our lives. Without question or thought, it is the best day of the week. It is the day we anticipate on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and the day we remember on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Sabbath is the holy time where we feast, play, dance, have sex, sing, pray, laugh, tell stories, read, paint, walk, and watch creation in its fullness. Few people are willing to enter the Sabbath and sanctify it, to make it holy, because a full day of delight and joy is more than most people can bear in a lifetime, let alone in a week. Well, that's a different thought of the Sabbath. But remember, God is our liberator, friends. He's our liberator. He doesn't give us the Sabbath to keep us from what he wants for us, from keep us from good. He gives us the Sabbath to liberate us. The Sabbath is how we fill our souls back for life. You can't do that if it's not different. All right, if you've checked out, check back in for like 3 minutes and 26 seconds. And let me give you some practicals about how to think about the Sabbath. And I'm going to leave some of it to you as a household. Here's some. Stop. Literally stop on Sunday. Do your to-do list on Saturday or your day off, whatever that is. Yard work. Unless with some exceptions. I'd say stop your yard work, particularly as it's work, right? Stop shopping on the Sabbath. Don't do errands on the Sabbath. Don't go to a movie on Saturday instead of Sunday. Go out to eat on Saturday instead of Sunday. Eugene Patterson calls Saturday a bastard Sabbath. That's a little provocative. Sorry for using the language, but I want you to think about it. And what he's saying is it's an illegitimate child of the seventh day, right? Most of us don't actually have to work 6 days, and right? It's actually a luxury of America. Most of us get to work 5 days and take 2 days off, right? What is Peterson's point is this: don't treat day 6 like day 7. And that's clearly what's happening in our culture, even among us as Christians. It's hard, friends. It's hard. And it comes down to specifics. Let me bring up something that is going to hits me hard, hits some of you hard. Youth activities, youth sports that encroach even more on the Sabbath, right? Recreation sports. It's a real problem. I had consternation when my kids were young. I have less of it because I have less to deal with right now. But I have a confession. I remember when Harry was 12 or 13, he was playing travel baseball, and it wasn't about Sunday morning. He went to Sunday morning worship, but we had him, we said, hey, you might have to skip some of Sunday school. It's okay. You can go skip some of Sunday school. Harry actually had an objection. I think he felt awkward sort of leaving it and not taking part in it. He actually drew me back, more me than my wife, and said, man, your kid doesn't want to leave to go to play travel sports, even though he did want to go play travel baseball. He loved baseball, but he felt something with it, some oddness to it. It made us reconsider, what am I doing, right? How am I keeping it as different? We bypassed on some lacrosse leagues and some basketball leagues that affected Sunday mornings. And we ought to think about them for the whole day even. And not just because I'm a pastor and I was working, but because I'm a Christian and I wanted to think about it. Friends, I did not manage it all that well. I got to be honest. So I say this out of empathy. I say this out of struggle, and not out of judgment. But I also say it as your pastor and wanting more for myself and my family and our families for long-term goals of what we want to be as the people of God. Sunday must be different. Carve out time together as a family. You perhaps do other family devotions on other days, but do them especially on Sunday. Spend time as a family together, walk together, play a game together, connect it together, serve together. One of the things we did when our family was young is we picked the Ashland Convalescent Center, and up a couple times a month we would go on Sundays to visit folks who had no one to visit them, had no family coming to visit them. We specifically asked, hey, can you tell us some people here at your center that no one visits? And we spent part of our Sunday doing that. There's a lot to think about. Let me just encourage you this way. Start with prayer. And let me encourage you this way. Small steps are better than no steps, right? Sometimes we feel overwhelmed and we feel some guilt with this. Small steps are better than no step. There is not a uniform celebration of Sundays, but there is uniformity. Whatever is honoring and pleasing and in worship of God, whatever leads you to remember the name and keep it holy and do so as your household with other households. Some small groups get together for Bible study. One of the reasons we put Sunday student ministry together is it's another place for students to be together and remember the Sabbath, not just in the morning, but in the evening. The Sabbath was made for you. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. This commandment is part of your liberation. He's not saying I brought you out in order to enslave you again. He's saying I liberated you, and this 1 and 7 is part of your liberation. There's uniqueness to the day as it invites you in the invitation to rest in Jesus, to stop, to remember, and to rest in the goodness of our God. Amen. Let's sing now as we close our time together this morning. Amen. Thank you, Randy. That is a picture of where we're headed, friend. It's a picture of Hebrews 4, the rest to which we're headed, to which we enjoy now today. I want to encourage you, Ross just put in the chat a link to the discussion guide. I really want to encourage you as families to take what I've said. Perhaps there's been challenge, some challenge in what you said. I hope you also, and let me just make sure that I say this at the end, there's grace in this, friends, and there's a lot of difference of how the Sabbath is to be observed, and there's liberation that results in our pursuit of what God has for us and all the time when we're faithful to him. And I want to encourage you, it's a very practical guide that helps you as a household sort of think through, hey, what goes on this day, and what would we like to go on, and why what's appealing, what's hard, and a reminder of God's grace in the midst of it. And so I encourage you to do that as a household today, or when you have opportunity to be together. The sermon discussion will continue. Dave Spangler will lead that, and then we'll be together again next Sunday hopefully at Hanover Wayside. Receive this benediction and know the love and grace of Jesus. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen, friends.